country has been suffering socio-economic fallout with economic instability and high levels of unemployment and poverty. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has not made these issues any better. But how can we extract ourselves out of this deep hole? Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya, Project Director of the Indlulamithi SA Scenarios 2020 initiative, joins us now virtually to weigh in on the National Planning Commission's recent report on the state of South Africa's economy and what steps we need to take to get us out of this crisis. Xolelwa, good morning, and thank you very much for your time this morning. I guess it's one thing to do scenario planning without a pandemic. It must be very different to do it during a pandemic. I mean, the Indlulamithi project, which started, I think, was in 2018, has painted for us three possible scenarios. And from the summary that I've seen, things are not looking very good for us as a country currently. And I wonder if the pandemic has made them worse.
Good morning, Dan, and thank you for having me. And yes, you're correct. You're quite correct. Building scenarios under the conditions we were building back in between 2017 and 2018, you know, it was completely different conditions, even though the challenges were there. That was actually the trigger behind us building scenarios, because the conditions then were state capture that was quite endemic. And now we're facing yet another challenge, but this time around, the challenge is of a global nature. So we're not in this alone. So we're part of a global community, and we are fortunate enough to also be participating in ways to find solutions in dealing with the pandemic.
Yeah, and the president of the ANC, at the end of the ANC's Lekgotla, calling for African solutions for African problems. But your scenario planning, the latest National Barometer 2020, in terms of those key driving areas that you talk about in terms of resistance, resentment, reconciliation, institutional capacity and leadership, and finally social inequality, shows that the dominant scenario is the Gwara one, what you guys call the Gwara one, where social inequality has become exacerbated. I mean, what are the chances of us reaching the 2030 National Planning Commission's goal of a better life for all?
This is very interesting, because when I was reading the review of the NDP, I mean, their findings also coincide with what we found in terms of especially inequality being the biggest driver towards Gwara, which is a state of lawlessness, instability, chaos throughout the landscape. But where we differ with this review is that we find that there's not much attention paid on, you know, the resentment issues. That is the emotional debt issues around where certain sectors or sections of our society believe that others have this unearned privilege and nothing has been done about it. And that's where inequality features, because there are those who are privileged, however, that privilege is unearned, and at times it leads to tensions amongst different groups. So I think that's where there is a difference between our findings in terms of what drives us to the Gwara nation. But what is quite prominent is the inequality. But it's not just inequality in terms of income or material inequality. It's inequality in terms of where we are located. The spatial arrangement is still very flawed. It's unequal. It's inequality in terms of gender, in terms of age, and many other dimensions. So if we're not paying attention to that, we are heading for disaster. And COVID-19 has actually intensified, you know, the rate at which we are going to or heading towards that collapse or the fall, so to speak. That's how it's written in the Gwara scenario.
So what do we need to do if you interpret your research? And we've got a pandemic that's really affecting all of us, not locally, globally, as you say. What can we do? What should we be focusing on towards 2030 to improve this gloomy scenario that you're painting?
Well, first of all, we need to take cognizance of the environment within which we are finding ourselves in. And we need to have an honest look at it, because a lot of these things were there before the pandemic. What the pandemic has done was actually just speed up the effects of it. So another thing that we need to be doing is to actually pay very special attention to inequality. But the challenges really are more around the things that underpin, the inability to implement or deliver on services. There's a challenge of leadership. There's a lack of planning. We do have the National Development Plan, but you find that it does not come across as a plan for all. It's not a plan for all of South Africa. There's institutional capacity. And now, when I speak about institutional capacity, it's not just the state alone that is supposed to have this capacity or this ethical leadership that is required to push us towards a better trajectory. You find that there's this deficiency in the private sector. There's this deficiency, leadership deficiency, even in civil society, because we do require an active citizenry that can hold the state accountable. So what we're recommending is that there needs to be better prioritization, because we find that we have these endless lists where we're trying to attend to so many things. So we need to be more focused to actually maybe pay attention to reduction of poverty and inequality, and maybe look at the economic infrastructure. The land and rural development issue needs to be attended to urgently, because that is what is pulling us apart. Because what we intend to measure as Indlulamithi is the extent to which we can attain social cohesion. And we found that land is one of those things that are causing resentment. So that could be one of the priorities. But in doing so, there needs to be strengthened planning, and that requires, capable or professional public service, but also in terms of business, because we need to emphasize that business has to come to the party, because the state alone will not be able to attain any of those things. And each of us as citizens also need to demonstrate active citizenship instead of just showing up when we have to vote. But most importantly, the planning system needs to become part of how we operate.
Thank you very much, Xolelwa. A lot of challenges, and I guess it's important to prioritize. I wonder what the 2021 National Barometer will look like. I know that that's coming up at about June. Hopefully we'll talk later this year when you release it. Thank you very much, Xolelwa, from Indlulamithi Scenario Planning, talking about how tough the situation we find ourselves in as a country. She's a project director of Indlulamithi SA Scenarios 2030 initiative. Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya. Now,